So a core concept that students are introduced to in later elementary and early middle school is called order of operations, and it's a basic principle that when you're solving math expressions, you want to do higher order operators first, like multiplication or division, and then you move on to lower order operators like addition and subtraction. So in this problem, students would need to know that they need to multiply 3 times 5 and then add 2. However, what we know is that if you change the order of operations, where the multiplier or the higher order operator is on the right, they tend to go left to right. They have this left to right bias where they'll add 2 plus 3 to make 5, and then they'll multiply by 5 to incorrectly get to the answer of 25. And so what we do know about order of operations is that if it's presented to kids in a way that kind of adheres to the left to right bias, they tend to perform pretty well. But if the structure of the problems you present to kids do not go left to right, then they tend to make higher order operator errors often. There's a lot of work in cognitive science and in perceptual learning that shows that people tend to pay attention to groupings or objects or numbers that are closer together. So in this case, here we have 3 and 5, which are the higher order of operator, and we are physically spacing them close together and spreading out this 2 a little bit further. We find that this is really helpful for kids to pay attention to the order of operations. If you take it in this, if you change the location and you take this 2 and the 3 and 5, if you space that 3 and 5 closer together, even if it's on the right side, we find that kids are better at doing this than they are when the spacing is equal. In addition to spacing, there's also research that suggests that coloring or cueing kids to pay attention to different groupings by highlighting numbers using color is actually helpful for them to shift their attention as well. So in this case, the 3 and 5 are in red, and then the 2 is on its own by the blue. And so the idea is that kids will focus first on the 3 times 5, and then they'll add the 2. In this example, this would be somewhere where if the location is further away from the left, kids would focus on the 3 and 5 first, and it would highlight that this is the higher order precedence, and then they would add 2. One concern about this approach is that if you give kids too much help by using helpful groupings, then when you take those away, students will not remember or not understand the true rules. And so one thing that we're testing in this project is how helpful or how hurtful are providing cues using spacing and color to students on both immediate performance and long-term learning. So when you give them congruent spacing, we know that that's helpful for them. We also know from research that when you give them incongruent spacing, where it does not follow the order of operations, it makes performance a lot harder. So students do way worse on this problem than they do on this problem. So one question that we're asking is, what happens if you give them the incorrect spacing or incorrect color grouping, and then give them feedback that basically tells them, hey, that thing you did was incorrect, and this is why it's incorrect. We want you to pay attention to the order of operations as opposed to the color groupings. The hypothesis is that if you give them training, they'll do worse immediately, but they'll do better longer term than students who are given either congruent spacing or neutral spacing. The implications of this work is to really think about how can teachers use the research to basically understand how they can help students who ignore the order of operations and do things incorrectly, and help them understand why what they're doing is not correct. And so most textbooks and most worksheets and materials that students use in classrooms have neutral spacing. And so what this project would do is it would provide insights into how can we better provide materials that support students where they are based on their understanding.